And now it's Boomer Life. Lifestyle ideas designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life with Sterling Fox.
Well, hello and welcome to Boomer Life here on AM 650. Glad to have you with us. We have an important hour ahead of us. We're going to talk about solutions to debt problems. Money is super cheap everywhere these days, and some people have been able to take advantage of it and all of a sudden find themselves, just a little beyond their capacity to deal with all of that indebtedness that came with the cheap money. We are about to talk to a person from Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy, who will give you every reason to believe there is hope and that there is freedom after debt. A real pleasure to welcome for the first time to Boomer Life, Brett Luckin. Brett is a vice president with Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy. Hello, Brett. Welcome to Boomer Life.
Hello, Sterling. Thank you.
Good to have you with us. You're a person from South Africa. How long have you been in Canada?
I am. I've been here since 2008.
Okay. Came in 08 and became a member of the team at Abakhan and Associates
2009.
In 2009. So you've been with the firm for about 5 years.
Correct.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Were you in the trustee business in South Africa before you moved to Canada?
No, I wasn't. In fact, I have a fairly colourful history in that in South Africa I was everything from an English university lecturer to an English high school teacher. I ran for a long time. Operated a publications business.
Okay.
I was a copywriter, an editor, and in fact the reason why I got into the business side of things is because by running my own business for about 15 years, I learned a hell of a lot about running small businesses, about how those businesses operate, profitability, reading financial statements, and I was actually fortunately, I suppose, quite successful, and eventually decided to pull the plug on a 16-hour day, 6 days a week, and move the family to the other side of the world and see what I could achieve here. And then I came here in 2008.
Interesting. Now, when you came, because you had experienced some success towards the end of your time in South Africa, we'll find out a little bit more about what happened before that, but you had a few dollars when you came and you moved your family to Canada.
That's right.
So then you came here with a pocket full of dough, and you started looking for businesses, enterprises to buy. And you actually rented a motorhome, stuffed the family and the dough into the motorhome, and toured the province of British Columbia looking for business possibilities.
Yeah, in fact, I think when I tell people the story, it turns out I probably have seen more of Canada and BC than many Canadians, because actually initially, as a family, well, my wife and I in 2000 actually came here and did what in South Africa was called an LSD trip, which in fact means look, see, discover.
Oh, I see. Because my mind went completely somewhere else.
I know it did. And what we did is we landed in Toronto and literally spent just short of 8 weeks doing the equivalent of backpacking, busing, catching the train, meeting people in pubs and asking for a lift to the next town.
Okay.
We went from Toronto to Niagara Falls, back up through to Quebec City, then right across through the plains, the central of Canada, into ultimately Edmonton, Calgary, was it Lake Louise, Banff, and then over the mountain. And we did that in the middle of winter. We did it in January, February, March, but that was quite deliberate.
Okay.
And the reason for it was you're coming to a country where we know the climate is very different. Where would we actually want to live? And it was very clear to us after a minus 29 day in Lake Louise, where my thumbs were so painful, despite the fact I had 3 pairs of gloves on, that I could not live on that side of the Rockies.
Right. This is not where we're going to settle down. Shall we board and move on?
Right. So when we came to BC and the temperature changed overnight like that, we decided, okay, it has to be BC.
Right.
So in 2008, when we actually landed as landed immigrants, we hired an RV and spent 2.5 months, literally 2.5 months, driving virtually everywhere you could drive in BC.
Right.
Visiting everything from a milk business in Terrace to a USP store in Salmon Arm to a whale watching business in Tofino.
Oh, my.
Are we going to buy this business and is this the town we're going to settle in? Eventually came to the conclusion that wasn't going to work for us. So we actually came to Vancouver. And then ultimately, a year later, I got my job at Abakhan.
Well, now, what did you find out, though? Because you had successful and other varieties of business experience as a small business entrepreneur
Correct.
in South Africa. So you come to Canada and you decide that maybe you'd like to get into that field here, buy a
Yes.
business of some kind. So in the process of touring the entire province of British Columbia and speaking to small business owners and operators all over our province,
Yes.
you, of course, as a serious person, if you're going to get serious about discussing the possibility of buying a business, you're going to get into those books and find out
Absolutely.
a little bit of the history of the business, its financial viability.
I believed in due diligence, so I did spend on each business that we entertained. I did spend a substantial amount of time understanding the business,
Right.
looking at the books, understanding the owner, because many of these businesses are obviously owner-operated, and as a result, the owner is the center, is the core of the universe.
Sure, of course.
For the business.
But discovering in the process that not every small
No.
business person is necessarily a good business
No,
person.
unfortunately, what I did discover, and the reason why I suppose ultimately we never purchased any businesses, is that many of these businesses are actually very poorly run.
Mhm.
And people didn't understand really basic concepts about the management of money and about operating a small business, cash flow, simple stuff like that.
Right.
And they had, unfortunately, had an inflated idea of what they thought their business was worth relative to what I was prepared to pay.
Of course.
And I was never, despite really dealing with more than 10 different people, never able to come to some kind of arrangement where we could find the same price on the table.
Interesting. So then how, after that very extended experiment at
Yes.
entrepreneurship in British Columbia, how then did you come to find Abakhan and Associates trustees in bankruptcy, Brad?
Well, here I was, sort of mid to late 2008, early 2009, going, okay, now what? Okay. And I spoke to a lot of people, because obviously that's the way you get a job.
Absolutely.
You don't get a job particularly as an immigrant who is socially and at a business network level largely isolated, because you've lost that all when you move to a new country.
Sure.
You need to talk to people. You need to be out there communicating. And when I was out there communicating, I spoke to a headhunter who initially said, you're the kind of person who seems to understand business. Why don't you go speak to a guy called David Bauer at the Bauer Group, who in fact are a trustee and bankruptcy firm and do some fairly large-scale bankruptcy and receivership jobs.
Okay.
And it turned out David Bauer only hires designated people at the time. Maybe he's changed his opinion now, but at the time he only hired designations, CAs, CGAs, CMAs. I didn't have those. And David Bauer said to me, you know what, you should speak to George Abakhan. He hires anyone.
Well, talk about making you feel special, huh? So George is a good guy, of course, and George was on the program on Boomer Life just a few weeks ago,
Yeah.
talking about the firm. He's a very nice man.
Absolutely.
And so you sat down with George, and he gave you a job on the spot.
And he gave me a job almost immediately. He said, if my other partner, who was a chap called Philip McCourt and still is, my other partner likes you. I sat down with George on a Friday. If my other partner likes you, come see him on a Monday. Then you got a job.
Right.
And on Monday, fortunately for me, Phil liked me. And the following day, I actually walked into my first business and took possession.
Oh, as a representative
Of
of
Abakhan and
Associates.
Correct.
And then you realized that this was a line of work that you wanted to pursue. There were certain designations or credentials
Correct, that I
you
needed.
were going to absolutely have to have if you wanted to set out a career in this.
Correct. I mean, it was very easy to realize right up front that if you wanted to make this successful, you needed to get the qualifications you needed to make it successful.
So what is a trustee in bankruptcy? This is all federal law.
Correct.
What does a Canadian bankruptcy trustee have to have by way of official credentials?
You have to go through a fairly extensive study and exam process, which ultimately qualifies you in something called a CIRP, which is a Chartered Insolvency Restructuring Professional. And after you do that, you then go through an oral board process where, what appears to be largely unfriendly people stare at you. And
A hostile committee.
That's right. And you are asked a number of questions which are designed to trip you up potentially and understand your knowledge of the process. And if you pass that, you get your trustee in bankruptcy certification.
Oh, so how long have you been an actual certified trustee then?
For just over a year.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah.
Now, there's another dimension to you and what you bring to the table as a now official trustee.
Yeah.
And that goes back to South Africa. And we talked about how you came to BC with, well, a few bucks. Okay, a lot of bucks.
Yeah,
But one only arrives at that success in business generally after having had a few failures.
Yes.
And you had, as many small business operators do, You had a face plant along the way and had a rough time.
In fact, I think I don't want to say that these are facts, but it's my understanding that most successful business men have been bankrupt at least once, and in some cases even potentially twice.
I believe that.
And I went through a phase where I left my job. I was gainfully employed. I left the job. I launched my own publishing house. I tried to launch what ultimately in South Africa in the early 90s was a pioneering magazine aimed at the disadvantaged youth who went to schools that, let's just say, were under-resourced in a pretty dramatic fashion.
Right, and these are in the days of just at the end of apartheid.
Literally,
and the black townships are still
correct,
hugely overpopulated and underserved.
You're talking about a year or two after Nelson Mandela was
exactly,
released. Right? And you're talking about schools that are in areas where there are hundreds of thousands of people without running water, without lights sometimes. Certainly no street lights, no street names, or you're talking about people who go to school, children who go to school where literally they go to school barefoot. That's not like the story your dad told you.
Right.
They're literally that's what they're like, and where sometimes the teacher's there, sometimes the teacher isn't.
So you decided you were going to organize a magazine to start getting into the schools in these disadvantaged townships.
Correct.
And you tried to line up some corporate sponsors to fund it.
And I
because
invested
there wasn't going to be any money at the receiving end of these publications.
No. I invested. It was largely going to be a non-profit approach, and I invested a large amount of personal time and personal risk associated with attempting that. Ironically, years later, those kinds of publications became very successful.
You were just too far ahead of your time.
I was ahead of the curve.
Now, did you have to go bankrupt? Do they have that in South Africa?
They don't have bankruptcy. I was without a doubt horrendously insolvent.
Right.
And I owed an obscene amount of money, and I went through, I would say, exactly the same thing that many of the people I deal with go through today. The hounding phone calls, the judgments.
So you've been one of those.
I've been one of those.
On the receiving end of those aggressive loan collectors.
I had 2 houses. I lost both of them. My wife, in fact, had to sell her car because my car had money left over. So if I sold my car, I would still owe money on it.
Right.
I cashed in every single policy I had, and I lived on zero income for over a year and a half with my wife supporting me. So the truth of the matter is I'm completely empathetic to the situation that many people who come to see me.
But you took the hard road, you took the high road, but it turned out to be a pretty hard road too, but you actually did honor all of those debts.
In fact, I repaid virtually every single person who was owed money by the company.
Right.
But it took me 6 years to achieve that.
Right. And had they had what we have in Canada as bankruptcy,
I would have gone bankrupt.
You would have taken that route, wouldn't you?
No question.
But it just didn't exist.
It didn't have. There was no such thing in South Africa. Well, there is no such thing in South Africa. No.
And what's the difference between a small business person, Brett, who goes bankrupt because the business fails, versus a private citizen who goes bankrupt simply because the debt load, the personal debt load, is overwhelming? Is there a difference in the eyes of the law, for example?
In the eyes of the law, largely no. I suppose the differential between the two of them is that the individual has taken on that debt themselves.
Yes.
Used their credit card or whatever it might be
to
purchase the personal assets, whereas your small business owner obviously presumably co-guarantees or gives some sort of personal guarantee to the bank for various debts that the business incurs as a result of trying to make the business successful.
Right.
And if the business fails and the business is unable to repay the debt, then those loans and guaranteed debts simply then just become a debt of the individual.
Oh, okay. So because this was the incorporation thing was where I was heading to. If you're a small business person and the business becomes something or other, ABC Widgets Incorporated,
yes.
I was always under the impression that you incorporated yourself so that if you incurred all of these hideous debts and found yourself incapable of paying them, that the company would implode, but because it was a legal entity, they couldn't go after you, the person behind the business.
You are right. However, having said that, there are certain debts, GST and payroll debt will follow you immediately.
Okay.
They are directors' liabilities. And obviously, if you, at any point in time while you were running that business, you signed a document which put you on the hook with the business for that debt.
As in a co-signing type situation.
And very often, I think what you find is that you find people coming to see me, and what happens is they actually can't remember because they signed these documents 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 years ago.
Right, sure.
And at the time, never occurred to them that this was ever going to be an issue.
Right, it never does when you're starting a business. You're just full of optimism and
That's
got
right.
the greatest thing since sliced bread, and just wait till the world finds out
And now
about me.
suddenly the business collapses, and now you're thinking,
Yeah.
that's $200,000 that I have at the line of credit at the bank, and how am I going to pay that back? I
Exactly.
just don't know.
Right.
You know. Credit cards, similar sort of situation. Very often, a corporate credit card will, without you realizing it, you may well have co-signed on that card for yourself personally.
Well, as we begin our conversation today on Boomer Life about debt with Brett Luckin from Abakhan and Associates, it's important that we take a few minutes here at the beginning of the show to really understand who our guest is. And our guest is not only a very interesting guy who's decided to make Canada his home, and I think we're the better because of that, but also an individual who's been down the small business route, who's been right to the wall, who's had the screaming phone calls from the outraged loan collectors. So there's a great deal of sympathy here for individuals who are overwhelmed by debt, either small business people or private citizens and their credit cards. This is Boomer Life. We're talking about, well, solutions to debt problems. Our guest in studio, Brett Luckin, Vice President, Abakhan and Associates, trustees in bankruptcy. Lots more still ahead. We're back after this quick timeout.
Canada's only weekly radio show dedicated to the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on AM 650.